Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's lecture on intersectional Chicana feminisms. So according to the book that we have assigned, Intersectional Chicana Feminisms emphasizes three particular areas: Mexican and Chicano cultures and histories, the significance of language, and inequalities of power and privilege experienced by Chicanas, and the social actions needed to address these. And I assigned this book because it gives us not only an overview of Chicana feminist theory and practice, but also identifies many of the aspects of Latina feminism that we will be exploring throughout the semester. I thought this would serve as a good introduction of what's to come in the rest of the course. One of the first things that the author discusses in the introductions is the issue of ethnic labeling, and she explains the complexities of ethnic labeling for Latinx people and provides an explanation for her choices in the text. And these are some of the many ways in which this population defines itself, which includes using national identities such as Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cuban American, etc., using the term Hispanic, using variations of the term Latino, Latina, Latinx. The Mexican American population itself has multiple ways of identifying itself: Mexican American, Mexican, or using variations of the term Chicano. There are also regional identities such as Tejano, New Mexican. So there's lots of different ways in which to identify and talk about this population. And what you see then in many Latinx studies scholarship is authors needing to explain what terms they use in their writing and why. And we see this in the introduction, where she talks about her choices and why she chooses to use the terms that she uses. In this course, I assume that we are all here to learn, and that we are not all necessarily at the same level in terms of our knowledge and experience when it comes to the politics of ethnic labeling. Therefore, I tend to use all of the labels she discusses interchangeably in my courses. So you'll hear me use Latinx, you'll hear me use Latino, Chicanx, Hispanic. And it's my way of recognizing the complexities of this population, the complexities of choosing a label that is adequate for this entire population. It is a way of recognizing the complex history of these different labels, and the fact that they are flexible labels, that they have changed over time and more than likely will continue to change, right? And so this is sort of how I decide to address this complexity of labeling this particular population, is to use the different terms interchangeably, because I know not everyone in the course is going to use one term or another, right? Now, then she decides to hone in on what the term Chicana itself means, especially when we're talking about Chicana feminism. That itself is a label, right? So the Chicana label has a particular history in politics, as she discusses. It recognizes the historical colonization of Mexican Americans since the Mexican-American War. It signals a historical political connection to the leftist movements of the 1960s and the 1970s. It also signals a hybrid identification that highlights their position, quote, situated in the interstices of multiple social, economic, and cultural systems. And this is a way of recognizing, right, that there is not one way of being Chicana, right? That there are Chicanas who are middle class, and there are Chicanas that identify with their indigeneity. There are Chicanas that identify more with the working class. They're college-educated Chicanas. They're farm-working Chicanas, right? And so this idea of recognizing sort of the multiple social, economic, and cultural systems within which Chicanas live, identify with, and so on, is another element to identifying yourself as a Chicana. They also recognize that Chicana has a transnational element in its global outlook for connection and solidarity with both Mexican women and women across the world. And as we'll see, as we go throughout the text and throughout the course, Chicanas don't only focus on their experiences within the US, but there's also often a lot of solidarity and connection across the border with women in Mexico, with women who live along the border border, on both sides of the border. That is a very unique and particular experience, but also making connections with other women of color in the United States, as well as all other global feminist movements. An important aspect of Chicana and Latina feminisms involves reclaiming the silenced histories of Chicana and Latina women in U.S. history. And so in this course, we will delve more deeply into some of these women's histories as examples of Latina feminist practice. And so you'll see that many of our readings throughout the course are more historical readings, right? Looking at the histories of different women, the different kinds of leadership roles that women have had, the different venues through which women have been activists. One of the things that she discusses as well in the introduction is that one of the key elements of Chicana feminism through this historical process has been to debunk certain cultural myths that historically have been upheld, in some ways to police Chicanas. The two key figures that have consistently been used in Mexican American culture to define women's roles are La Malinche and La Virgen de Guadalupe. La Malinche is considered to be the indigenous female trader who worked with the Spanish conquistadors against the indigenous people and gave birth to the first mestizos. So she's perceived as a traitor. La Virgen represents the motherly, virginal, and martyr figure that quote unquote good Chicana women should strive to emulate. Chicana feminists have dedicated a considerable amount of work to reclaiming La Malinche and her more complicated history, while rejecting Marianismo as the only definition of Chicana womanhood. This dichotomy between the quote-unquote bad woman and the good woman will appear throughout many of our readings this semester, and the ways it shapes Latina's relationship to the gender and sexual identities. And so we will see versions of these two icons appear throughout many of our readings, but also the ways in which Latinas themselves, in a sort of talk back, right, reject these particular cultural icons. Chicana feminism is also about intersectionality. Chicana feminisms ascribe to the notion that women belong to more than one oppressed group, and that through understanding the intersection of how these different social categories, such as sexuality, class, race, ethnicity, gender, physical ableness, intersect in contextually specific situations, Chicana's multiple oppressions can be understood. And then again, this goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about recognizing that there's not one way, one size fits all way of being Chicana, of experiencing being Chicana, but that how a Chicana woman identifies, what her life is like, is going to intersect with, you know, her race, you know, whether she's physically able, ability, if she has a disability, her sexuality, right? How does she identify? And so Chicana feminism is about recognizing all of those complexities as well. One of the other elements of Chicana feminism is being conscious of political coalitions. Chicanas emphasize a coalitional approach to their feminism, where they seek to create collaborations or coalitions across borders. Chicana also seek coalitions with other women of color feminists and emphasize more of a collective kind of approach than Western individualism that they often attribute to white American feminism. Now, the first chapter talks about the sitio, spaces, and lenguas of Chicana feminism as a way to talk about these sort of two key ways in which Chicana feminism is discussed and sort of situated, right? So sitios or spaces in Chicana feminist theory can refer to geographical locations, so that's the US-Mexican border. It can also refer to historical racial origin, or it can also be discussing philosophical space. So sitios as a geographical space is particularly represented by the work of Gloria Anzaldúa, who first theorized about the borderlands as symbolic of the hybrid mestiza identity of Chicanas, an interstitial or quote unquote in-between space where new cultures, identities, and politics can be created that combines the multiple experiences and identities of Chicanas. Sitios as a historical racial origin recognizes not only the history of colonization, but also the indigenous history that has been often repressed in favor of the Spanish ancestry. For Chicana feminists, this means not only reclaiming the indigenous past, but also recognizing the internalized racism that leads to a devaluing of darker skin, for example. Finally, claiming a philosophical space means claiming a space where they are critical of patriarchy, but unlike white feminists, their critique is not from an individualist standpoint, but from a more intersexual hybrid standpoint, where they recognize that their oppression isn't just based on gender, but also on race, class, sexuality, and so on. Now, the lenguas part or tongue part of the chapter refers to different ways in which we refer to language, right? And the different ways in which language is reclaimed among Chicana feminists. And this is speaking specifically about language, as you might expect, discourse, or literally tongue as a symbol of sexuality. So reclaiming language for Chicana feminists means not only reclaiming the significance of the Spanish language itself, but also the various iterations of Spanish, such as Spanglish and specific forms of Chicano Spanish slang. For Chicana writers, it has also meant incorporating Spanish into their writing and refusing to italicize in order to create for their monolingual readers the experience of disconnection and discomfort experienced by monolingual Spanish speakers who have to navigate the difficulties and judgments of not speaking English. In academic circles, reclaiming language for Chicana feminist theories has also meant reclaiming and creating their own discourses, their own theories that are based on their own everyday experiences and knowledge. Finally, claiming a lengua in its literal definition as tongue has served as a way for Chicanas to speak about sexuality, sexual identities, and sexual pleasure and desire, all typically taboo subjects in many Chicano and Latinx communities. And we'll see these different iterations of language and how it's used by Chicana and Latina feminists throughout the semester. The last chapter we had to read for this week talks about and uses Elba Sanchez's work and metaphor of feeling like a continent with many geographies as an image that best captures how Chicana feminists have attempted to create a feminist theory and practice that speaks to their intersectional experiences, their multiple geographical spaces of experiences and identity, both across the border and throughout the United States, and aims to challenge Western views of the self, which entails using particular methods that the author goes on to delineate throughout this chapter. So this chapter really focuses on what are the different methodologies used by Chicana feminists to cover all of these different themes and approaches we've been talking about so far. So the key methods used by Chicana feminists include writing, language, collaboration, and testimonio. Chicanas use writing as a method to document their own personal experiences and memories, to document the histories of Chicanas in the United States, and to write against or in opposition to the various forms of oppression they experience, whether it comes from within or outside of the Chicanx communities. As previously discussed, Chicanas are purposeful in their use of language, in their writing, bringing the various forms of Spanish used by Chicanos, but also their varied experiences with negotiating language in the United States, including not speaking Spanish. They also take on the limitations of translation when translating certain words from Spanish to English fails to convey the significance of a particular word. So not only do they include Spanish language, Spanglish, and so on, but they also talk about and articulate the difficulties of navigating language for Chicanas as part of their experience. Collaboration as a method for Chicana feminist knowledge production means that Chicana feminist theories are not built in isolation, but in collaboration with one another and with women within their communities. Finally, testimonials are typically forms of writing that are meant to bear witness to some kind of tragedy, crisis, oppression, and so on. Many Chicana and Latina writers have turned to this method of writing about their own lives and the lives of other women in order to bear witness to the experiences of Latinx women in the US. And we will see all of these methodologies being used throughout the semester. If you notice in the syllabus, the last book we will be reading this semester is a testimonio a collection of testimonials written by different Latinas. So we will definitely be delving deeply into the various methodologies that are used as well. So this brings our lecture for this week to an end. I will see you guys online. Have a wonderful week.